I used to think working at a pet store would be healing somehow. I'd just come out of a long, bitter breakup, and I remember standing in my apartment one night, staring at the walls, thinking, I need something soft in my life. Something warm. Something that doesn't talk back. I've always loved animals, maybe more than people, if I'm honest, so when I saw the listing for a pet care associate at one of the big-name chains, I applied without a second thought. That was 2 years ago. I haven't owned a pet since. When people imagine a pet store, they see the colorful aisles stacked with toys and treats, the sound of birds chirping, the soft whimper of puppies in glass enclosures, and children pressing their noses to the glass, begging their parents for just one. They don't see what's behind the swinging door in the back or what happens after the last customer leaves. They don't hear the panicked breathing of a dying guinea pig that's been left untreated for 3 days because the manager said it's not cost-effective to take it to the vet. I was that person once on the other side of the glass. I believed in the fantasy. I thought I was walking into a place that celebrated animals, that treated them like family. But what I walked into was a business. And I don't mean that in the abstract, of course it's a business way. I mean a machine, efficient, clinical, and disturbingly indifferent. On my first day, I was shown how to clean the fish tanks. Not just a quick scrub, there was a whole checklist, timed intervals, temperature control, pH balance readings. The trainer, a girl only a year older than me, rattled off the steps like a robot. But what stuck with me most wasn't the process. It was the way she said, almost casually, if they float overnight, just scoop before opening. We're not supposed to do tank changes during peak hours, it ruins the atmosphere. She laughed when she said it. Like it was just one of those things you get used to. By the end of that first week, I had already handled 3 dead fish, 1 collapsed hamster, and a bearded dragon with a skin condition so advanced it had open lesions across its spine. No vet had seen it. No one planned to take it to one. The store manager told me, reptiles are low priority unless corporate says otherwise. That phrase, unless corporate says otherwise, was something I'd hear almost daily. It was the answer to everything. Why didn't we quarantine sick animals? Corporate didn't approve the extra enclosures. Why did we sell puppies with worms? Because they came pre-shipped from our supplier, and returning them cost more than treating them. Why weren't we allowed to call animal control when birds got loose in the ceiling? Corporate policy. Bad press. They had an entire manual on optics, how things look to the customer. Perception of wellness was more important than actual wellness. We were taught to rotate the cages so no animal looked lethargic for too long. Put the spry ones up front, they said. Hide the sick ones in the back or in the off-floor enclosures. We weren't supposed to call them cages, by the way. Habitats sounded more compassionate. But it's hard to pretend something's a habitat when it reeks of urine and sawdust and the only airflow is from a dusty ceiling fan that never stops squeaking. There was a moment early on, before I became numb to it, when I stayed late after a closing shift to check on a mouse that had given birth. She was clearly struggling. Her breathing was shallow, her tiny body barely lifting with each gasp. I told my supervisor. He shrugged and said, "It happens. We lose a few every week. Just clean it up in the morning if she doesn't make it." Then he turned off the light and left. I stood there in the dark, watching her struggle, her pink newborn squirming around her. I wanted to take her home. But it was against policy to remove any animal without a purchase record. Everything had to be accounted for. Every life had a barcode. People don't realize that most pet store animals aren't bred with care. They're mass-produced, shipped in crates, sometimes stacked in vans for 12, 16 hours with no airflow, no water. Sometimes they arrive already sick. Sometimes they don't survive the trip. I remember one shipment of parakeets that arrived in the dead of summer. Half of them were listless. A few had blood around their beaks. We were told to spruce up the cages and see who rallies. The ones that didn't? We weren't allowed to document the deaths. Too many loss reports look suspicious. We were told that customers don't want to hear about illness. Don't talk about infections. Don't use the word vet unless asked. Offer the warranties. Push the starter kits. Smile. Make the family feel like they're rescuing the animal. But they weren't rescuing anything. They were buying a product. and we were trained to treat it like one. I know this is just the beginning. You probably think I'm exaggerating, or maybe you're already thinking about that one store where your puppy came from and how wonderful they were to you. And maybe they were. But what I'm about to tell you next will change the way you see every single pet store aisle. Because once you've seen what I've seen, once you've touched it, smelled it, heard the quiet suffering just beyond the music playing over the speakers, you don't ever forget it. And you don't ever want to walk back in. Not even as a customer. Especially not as a customer. There's a certain smell to the backroom of a pet store, one that clings to your clothes, your hair, even your skin. It's not just the animals, it's the combination of stale bedding, ammonia-soaked corners, half-washed cages, and the faint, metallic tinge of fear. That sounds dramatic, I know, but it's not something I imagined. It's something I felt. Every single day. We were told to spray freshener mist in the small animal aisle every morning before opening. Not for the animals, of course, those poor things could barely breathe as it was, but for the customers. Scent branding, they called it. A mix of vanilla and citrus, meant to evoke cleanliness, warmth, familiarity. Meant to mask what was really going on just a few feet away. I used to walk through those aisles before the doors opened, stocking shelves and resetting end caps, and I'd see it. The performance of care. Shelves arranged with pastel chew toys. Luxury hay blends packaged to look artisanal. Fancy fish tanks glowing in soft blues and purples. It was all designed to make the customer feel like they were buying something more than just a living creature. They were buying a lifestyle. A story. And we were part of the script. Smiles, upbeat voices, scripted responses to common questions. Do these birds come from responsible breeders? Absolutely. All our partners are screened through our vendor compliance program. Translation? They come from breeding mills. Mass facilities you'll never visit, located in the middle of nowhere, where animals are born, boxed, and shipped like product inventory. The term responsible doesn't mean what you think it does. It means paperwork is in order. It means we didn't get caught. The birds, in particular, were hard to look at after a while. Parakeets with missing feathers. Cockatiels that plucked themselves raw from stress. We were told not to mention behavioral signs unless directly asked. The training even had a term for it, selective reassurance. If a customer noticed a bird pacing obsessively or screaming nonstop, we were instructed to say, "Oh, he's just energetic today." They're very social animals. Social animals. Right. Social animals locked in plexiglass boxes under fluorescent lights 14 hours a day, with no real enrichment and music looping over them like a synthetic lullaby. The worst were the rabbits. People think they're low maintenance. Quiet. Good for kids. But what they don't know is how sensitive rabbits actually are. Their digestive systems can shut down from stress. They need space, stability, and gentle handling. But we sold them in cages no bigger than a filing cabinet. Kids would come in and bang on the glass, tapping and squealing, and I'd see the rabbits flinch, eyes wide, ears twitching like they were trying to escape through sound. I used to sneak extra handfuls of hay into their bins when the floor manager wasn't looking. It felt like the only kindness I could offer in a place like that. Do you know what stock rotation means in the context of live animals? It means we move the unsold ones to less visible cages toward the back and bring the newer, younger ones up front. It's exactly what you'd do with aging produce at a grocery store, only in this case, the aging inventory has a heartbeat. If they stayed too long without selling, especially the small mammals, we marked them down like clearance items. I once saw a dwarf hamster labeled at $2.99. He was missing one eye, had a wound on his hind leg, and still, the note next to his enclosure read, "Great for first-time pet owners. Friendly disposition." He bit me when I tried to clean his cage. He was terrified in pain. Of course he bit me. But no one asked if he was okay. They asked if I'd been vaccinated for tetanus. They asked if I logged it as an incident. They asked if I sanitized the area afterward. At first, I thought I could fix things from the inside. Talk to the right people. Advocate for better treatment. I started taking notes, quietly photographing conditions, emailing reports up the chain. You want to know what I got back? Thank you for your passion. Unfortunately, we must align with corporate policy. That was the last time I tried. From that point on, I just watched. I watched and waited, taking mental snapshots of every lie we were expected to tell. Every time we said an animal was eating well when we hadn't seen it touch food in days. Every time we said, she just needs to warm up to you, when she was clearly failing to thrive. Every time a new shipment arrived and we found a stiff, cold body in the corner of a crate. And worst of all, we all just adjusted. Even me. I stopped flinching. Stopped asking questions. I started referring to the animals by their SKU numbers. I started focusing more on attach rate, how many products I could upsell during a pet purchase. If I didn't meet my metrics, I'd be pulled into coaching. Every live sale should come with a 3-item minimum, they'd remind us. It wasn't about giving the animal what it needed. It was about giving the customer the illusion that they were prepared. Sometimes I think back to that first week. How naive I was. How I still thought I was walking into a place full of love. But it wasn't love. It was logistics. And no one cries over a logistics failure. Especially not the ones in cages. I used to think the animals were the only ones being mistreated. That maybe if I just focused on their suffering, I could ignore what was happening to the rest of us. But the truth is, the system doesn't just break animals. It breaks the people who care about them too. You start off thinking you're the exception. That you'll do better. That you'll stay compassionate no matter what. And then, slowly, you don't. Not because you stop caring, but because it becomes too painful to care and survive in a place like that. It doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in. You're told to clock out for lunch, but still expected to clean cages while you eat. You're warned not to go over on labor, but if you don't finish your tasks, you'll be written up. You're expected to smile through 12-hour shifts, back-to-back weekends, and birthday parties you have to host for kids while a dying ferret gasps for air in the stockroom fridge because you weren't allowed to take it to the vet in time. Yes, that happened. And yes, there is a fridge in the back. It's labeled, "Do not store food, animal only," in faded sticker letters. The worst part? After a while, you stop feeling shocked by it. You learn the fridge code. You stop hesitating before opening the door. You place the tiny, wrapped bodies inside like packages. You update the log. You go back to work. Because if you cry every time, you'll never make it through the week. And they count on that. On your silence. Your slow emotional decay. I worked alongside a girl named Marissa. Quiet. Gentle. Obsessed with guinea pigs. She used to bring little fleece blankets from home and line their bins with them when no one was watching. She even knitted one of them a hat once. I told her she was sweet. She said, "No. I just can't stand the plastic. It makes their feet bleed." She lasted 5 months. I found her in the break room one day, curled into herself, shaking. She'd just cleaned out a bin where 3 baby rats had been cannibalized by their mother. No one had warned her. The enclosure hadn't been labeled. The mom had been dumped in there with her newborns by a new hire who didn't know any better, and no one caught it until it was too late. Marissa was told to document the loss, clean the bin, and reset for display. No counseling. No one even asked if she was okay. She left her apron in the trash that day. Never came back. Turnover was constant. People came in with love in their hearts and left bitter, numb, or broken. The ones who stayed longer than a year, we were a different breed. Either hardened enough to stop caring, or twisted enough to pretend we didn't. You start playing mental games just to cope. If I can get through the bird aisle before crying, I'll let myself take a bathroom break. If this one drinks water today, maybe the day isn't a total loss. If the new shipment has fewer than 2 dead on arrival, maybe things are improving. You see how insane that is, right? And yet, that was my normal. Here's something most customers don't realize. Those little signs that say, "Adoptable pet," from our rescue partner? That's not always what it seems. A lot of stores work with rescues that are basically rebranded overstock mills. It's a clever way to dump unsold inventory into a tax-deductible donation and slap a feel-good label on it. I once saw a rabbit that sat in our store for 2 months, unsold, increasingly sick, disappear overnight, and reappear 2 weeks later with a new sign, adoptable bunny, looking for a second chance. Same rabbit. New price tag. New marketing spin. The illusion was everything. The reality? Disposable. And I haven't even told you about grooming yet. We had an in-house salon. You'd think that would be the safest part of the store, right? Clean clippers, pampered pups, all that. But I've seen dogs come out of that room shaking uncontrollably, nicked up, pupils blown wide from stress. You ever wonder why they don't let you watch the grooming process? Why there's no open viewing window? It's not just about distraction. It's about control. If you saw what really happened when an overbooked groomer's on their sixth dog in 3 hours and that animal won't stop twisting, you'd never bring your pet back. Cuts happen. Burns happen. I've seen dogs come out with raw spots behind their ears where the clippers dug in too deep. If a pet is injured, there's a very careful script they follow. Just a little irritation. He was wiggly today. You might notice some redness. That's normal with sensitive skin. And if a dog panics and bites, groomers are told not to report it unless there's blood. I wish I were making this up. I really do. But this is the part people never talk about. The emotional toll it takes on the people working there, especially the ones who still care. You see the weariness in their faces, the tiny cracks in their smiles, the way they look down when a child picks out a pet, knowing full well that animal probably won't live past a year in a plastic enclosure with the wrong bedding, wrong food, and parents who only half listened. And still, we hand it over, smiling, saying, "Congratulations on your new family member," like we didn't just witness the start of a tragedy in slow motion. Because that's the job. That's what the machine expects of us. And eventually, you either fall apart, or you stop being human altogether. There's something different about the store after closing. It's not just the silence, though that's part of it. It's the way the building exhales, like it's been holding its breath all day. The music cuts out. The scent machine stops spraying. The lights dim slightly in the aisles, just enough to save on energy, but not enough to trigger suspicion if someone looks through the front windows. The animals don't settle into sleep. Not really. Most of them don't even get darkness. They just sit there, in glass boxes under constant light, watched by no one. This is when the real neglect happens. During the day, there's at least some illusion of supervision. Staff walking the aisles, customers peering in, managers hovering. But at night, there's no one. Just us, closing staff, tired, overworked, and rushing to hit lockup before payroll cuts into overtime. You want to know something? There are no overnight care protocols. None. No dedicated animal supervisor. No monitoring systems. No temperature alerts unless the central HVAC fails, and even then, it can take hours before corporate is notified. I've walked in for a morning shift and found an entire tank of tropical fish floating, white-bellied, because the filter burned out overnight and no one caught it. It was just me and the smell. And that sound, like static, when a tank goes still and the aerator chokes out its last breath. One of the worst cases I remember was a shipment of baby turtles, red-eared sliders, about the size of Oreos. We weren't even supposed to have them. Technically, selling turtles under 4 inches is banned in several states because of salmonella risk, but there's always a loophole. For educational purposes only. That phrase, so innocent on paper, allowed us to sell them in bulk. They arrived late one Friday. A shipping delay, of course. No one wanted to stay and unbox them, so the manager told us to just keep them sealed until morning. It was summer. No water. No ventilation. They were in a cardboard box, shrink-wrapped, under a heat lamp meant for reptiles. 18 turtles went in. 7 came out alive. Barely. No vet was called. We weren't allowed. Non-essential loss, the log said. We tossed the bodies into a biohazard bag, sealed it with red tape, and stuffed it into the freezer. Yes, the freezer. That's something else they don't tell you. If an animal is injured but not dead, say, a parakeet with a broken wing, or a gerbil paralyzed after falling off a shelf, we're not allowed to treat it. We're not allowed to euthanize either. We're told to monitor, which is code for let it die quietly, preferably off the sales floor. But when they don't die fast enough, they go into the freezer. Alive. There's no gentle way to say that. I've stood there, teeth clenched, hands shaking, as a shift lead wrapped a twitching mouse in a paper towel and slid it into a plastic bag. Said something like, "It'll go quick." They get sleepy. Then pushed it in alongside the others, stacked like meat. That was the night I stopped sleeping properly. They train you to compartmentalize. There's a phrase they use in meetings: maintain operational efficiency in emotionally sensitive situations. That's corporate speak for, don't freak out if something dies in front of a customer. Don't show emotion. Don't act shocked. Smile. Offer condolences. Recommend a refund or replacement if needed. Yes, you heard that right. Replacement. We treated pet deaths like defective merchandise. If a hamster died within 14 days, you could bring the body back, in a Ziploc bag, no less, and we'd offer you another one, same price range, no questions asked. Sometimes people wouldn't even bring the body. Just the receipt. Yeah, it stopped moving. Can I get another? Sure. Let's try again. No pause. No hesitation. Just a transaction. And then there were the feeders. If you've never worked in a pet store, you might not know what I mean. Feeder animals are the mice, rats, and crickets sold not as pets, but as food. For snakes. For lizards. For birds of prey. Entire sections of the store exist just for this purpose, hidden toward the back. Shelves full of trembling pinkies, newborn mice with no fur, blind and squeaking, stacked in plastic tubs like an assembly line. They're bred to die. That's their entire purpose. We were told not to let customers bond with the feeders. No naming. No handling unless necessary. Don't humanize the product, one training guide said. It sounded absurd the first time I read it. Product. But over time, it made sense. You can't sleep at night if you let yourself remember that these are babies. That they feel pain. That some of them never even open their eyes before being dropped into a tank and swallowed alive. Some customers, usually kids, would beg their parents to let them save one. Buy a feeder and keep it as a pet. Most parents said no. The lucky ones got a reprieve, maybe a few months of life in a small enclosure before dying alone of respiratory disease, because feeder mice aren't bred for health. They're bred fast. Cheap. Disposable. I started sneaking them food sometimes. Extra bedding. One time I kept a little runt in my apron pocket for half a shift, planning to take him home. But I got caught. Not fired, just warned. Don't make this emotional, my supervisor said. That's how people burn out. But I was burning out. I just didn't know how deep the flames had gone yet. There was one thing that always made customers light up, the rescue section. We kept it near the front of the store, right past the registers, under a big sign that read, "Local partners, real second chances." The cages were cleaner. The signage had names: Benny, Lulu, Midnight, not just male rabbit or adult cat. Volunteers came in once a week wearing branded t-shirts and big smiles, talking about rehabilitation and happy endings. It felt different. Hopeful, even. And that was exactly the point. Because it was all curated, just another part of the illusion. The truth is, rescue partnerships weren't about helping animals. They were about optics. About distancing the store from the darker parts of its own supply chain. It's a clever sleight of hand. Distract customers with a few feel-good adoption stories, and they'll stop asking where the other animals came from. But I kept asking. Quietly at first. I remember one weekend, we had a litter of kittens coming through a local rescue group we worked with. Adorable, wide-eyed, with little neckerchiefs tied around their collars like they were going to a photo shoot. The signage said they were rescued from a hoarding situation. Customers were moved. They cried. One woman filled a cart with premium cat food she didn't need just because she was so inspired. But no one asked what happened to the rest of the cats from that hoarder house. Because here's how it actually works. These partner rescues aren't always licensed shelters. Some are just glorified foster networks, underfunded, overrun, desperate for exposure. The pet store gives them that exposure. In return, they provide a rotating cast of animals the store can showcase as evidence of their compassion. But they don't bring the sick ones. Or the elderly ones. Or the ones with behavioral issues. Just the cute, sellable faces. And the rest? Well, they don't make it into the building. I once asked one of the volunteers off the record how many animals they had to turn away every week. She looked at me, dead tired, eyes red from lack of sleep, and said, "More than we save." Way more. Then she walked away. I never saw her come back. That's the part that gets lost in all the branding. The flyers. The Instagram posts of adoption success stories. There's a bottleneck in animal rescue, and only the prettiest, healthiest, most adoptable animals get through. The rest, especially the ones from mill rescues with missing eyes, matted fur, or untreated infections, are quietly passed over. Sometimes euthanized due to lack of space. Sometimes just kept in foster limbo until they deteriorate beyond help. But none of that makes it into the glossy signage. You'd be shocked how often pet stores rebrand unsold inventory as rescues. That rabbit we couldn't sell for 6 weeks? Now he's a local rescue looking for his forever home. That ferret with a bite history? Surrendered by a family who couldn't give him the attention he deserves. The line between sales and adoption isn't just blurred, it's manipulated. We had one regional manager who came in during a quarterly visit and literally rearranged the adoption signage himself. Moved the cages closer to the entrance. Added some fake grass underneath. Told us this kind of thing builds trust. Customers like the idea that we give back. He said it with a grin, like he was proud of the strategy. Not once did he look into the cages. Here's something most people don't realize. When you adopt an animal from a store-based rescue, you're still paying. The price might be lower than a sale, but it's still a transaction. And not all of that money goes to the rescue group. Often, the store takes a cut, sometimes a flat fee, sometimes a percentage. And of course, there's the push to sell accessories with it. Leashes, tanks, litter boxes, starter kits. I've seen adoption events generate more revenue than Black Friday weekends. Because people who think they're saving a life, they spend more. They want to feel good. They want to believe they're doing something kind. And the store? The store's more than happy to reinforce that belief. One day, we got a shipment of puppies labeled Rescue Transport, Arkansas. That was strange. We weren't supposed to carry dogs unless it was through a certified adoption group. I asked a shift lead about it and she looked nervous. Said it was a new vendor pilot. I didn't push. But I started doing my own digging. Turns out, those puppies weren't rescues. They were overflow stock from a licensed breeder in the Midwest who'd rebranded themselves as a rescue operation to get around state laws. Legally, they weren't doing anything wrong. Technically, the dogs were surrendered due to breeder downsizing. That's how they wrote it on the intake forms. But I've seen breeder downsizing up close. It doesn't look like surrender. It looks like dogs in wire cages, barking until they're hoarse, with feces caked into their paws. The whole system depends on language. Surrender instead of abandoned. Adoption fee instead of sale. Partnered rescue instead of offloading unsellable stock. These are the tricks. Subtle. Sanitary. Impossible to challenge without looking like you hate animals, or worse, that you're against rescue itself. And that's the most painful part. There are real rescues out there. Real people doing honest, backbreaking work to save the creatures this system leaves behind. I've met them, hugged them, watched them cry over animals no one else would touch. But those people, they're not the ones working PR for corporate pet brands. They're the ones scrubbing urine off blankets in a garage while the store down the street sells rescued puppies for $249 plus tax. I used to believe rescue meant something. Now I flinch when I hear the word. Because somewhere along the line, compassion became a brand. And like everything else in that store, it came with a price tag. The first time I heard the term preferred supplier, I thought it meant something good. Like there was a standard. Like someone somewhere was actually watching, approving, ensuring the animals came from places with warmth and care, someone feeding them by hand, tucking them into straw-lined enclosures, giving them a name before they had a number. But that's not what it meant. What it really meant was volume, predictability, cost efficiency. It meant that the animals arrived on time, in uniform sizes, with minimal loss upon delivery. That's what they called it in the logs. Loss upon delivery. Not death, not casualty. Just a minor inconvenience on the balance sheet. Most people don't know that the animals in pet stores come from breeding mills. Not just the dogs and cats you hear about on the news. All of them. Hamsters, guinea pigs, parakeets, lizards, rats, even the fish. Especially the fish. These aren't farms. They're factories. There's a warehouse in rural Pennsylvania. I won't name it, because I'm still not sure how much trouble I'd get in, but it's one of the major suppliers for half the pet stores on the East Coast. They call it a small animal facility. It supplies thousands of animals every week. Mice bred in plastic tubs. Ferrets born in dimly lit basements. Rabbits pulled from their mothers at 3 weeks, far too early, because longer weaning means fewer litters per year. We used to get boxes from there with big red stamps on the side. Live animals. Fragile. Rush delivery. But nothing about it felt fragile. It was always a rush. And by the time we opened the boxes, half of them were already fading. You learn to open shipments slowly. You learn to brace yourself. We had a protocol. A checklist. If an animal arrived dead, you marked it in the inventory. Took a photo. Bagged it. Logged the vendor. But you didn't report it unless the number crossed a certain threshold. Loss tolerance, they called it. For hamsters, it was 3 per box. For parakeets, 5. Anything under that? Acceptable. I once opened a box of baby mice that had been crushed during transport. The box had shifted in the truck, and the bedding had collapsed on top of them. They were still warm. Still twitching. One of them was trying to crawl, dragging its hind legs. I locked myself in the mop closet and cried for 15 minutes. Then I cleaned the bin. Took the photos. Logged the loss. I hated how easy it became. But the part that broke me, the part one still can't talk about without feeling sick, was when I learned how often the store asked for imperfect animals. We had these budget bins for pets that didn't meet visual standards. Hamsters with scars. Fish with minor fin damage. Rabbits that were slightly underweight or didn't have ideal temperament. Those animals were cheaper. Great for first-time owners, the signs always said. But the truth was, they were broken before they even got here. And we ordered them anyway. Because the margins were better. I remember a phone call with a vendor, just a normal inventory check-in. He asked if we wanted a shipment of retired breeders. Female guinea pigs, maybe 8 months old, past their prime but still good for display. I asked what happened if they didn't sell. He laughed and said, "That's your problem now." We took them. 2 died within a week. No vet. No refund. Just more stock on the next truck. You know what's funny? People think buying from a pet store is safer. Cleaner. They say, "Oh, I'd never get a dog from a puppy mill," while pointing at a rabbit that was pulled from a wire crate and packed into a van 600 miles away. They don't see the difference. They don't want to. Because the store is clean. The lights are bright. There's music playing. A teenager with a name tag tells them it's all okay. That the animal's been vetted. That it was raised responsibly. It wasn't. Most of the time, these animals never saw daylight until they were under the fluorescent glare of a sales floor. They don't know what silence is. What space is. What it means to be touched gently or fed slowly or held for more than a second without being picked up, judged, and put back down. You can see it in their eyes if you know how to look. That flat, wide stare. That twitchy, perpetual movement. Like they're waiting for something bad, even when you're trying to be kind. And the worst part? The store has us trained to sell them anyway. To package it all into a story. This one's really friendly. He just needs time to adjust. She's such a sweetheart. Look how curious she is. But inside, we know the truth. We know the rats have respiratory infections from the moment they're born. We know the fish are dosed with tranquilizers during shipment to keep them calm, and sometimes they never fully wake up. We know the birds scream not because they're excited, but because they're terrified. Because they remember what came before. Because nothing about any of this is natural. And yet, the boxes keep coming. The forms keep getting signed. The customers keep smiling. And we keep opening crates, scooping out tiny bodies, and pretending this is normal. Because for the store, it is. Because in the supply chain of suffering, we're just another link. People used to come in smiling, excited, hopeful, kids tugging on their parents' hands, pointing at the glass cages like they were looking through a toy store window. Couples whispering about how a pet might help them feel more like a family. Lonely teenagers asking about starter pets with that quiet look in their eyes, the one that says, "I just need something to love me back." They always meant well. And that's what made it harder to watch. Because good intentions don't mean anything when the whole system is designed to lie to you before you even walk through the door. From the moment a customer steps inside, they're being sold a fantasy. The shelves are organized by theme: Bunny Bliss, Reptile Haven, First Pet Starter Kits. Each display makes it look effortless. The idea is, you don't need to know anything. Just pick what looks cute. We'll tell you the rest. But the rest is always filtered. I can't count how many times I heard a parent ask, "What's the easiest pet for a young child?" And every time, we had to steer them toward hamsters or fish. Not because they were truly easy, but because they were cheap. Low risk. Disposable, if we're being honest. What they didn't hear was what we said in the break room afterward. Hamster's going to bite that kid. Fish will be belly up in 3 weeks. Guarantee that tank's cloudy before the week's out. But none of that made it onto the sales floor. Our training taught us to avoid what they called negative language. Don't say a guinea pig needs 8 square feet of space. Say, they do great in cozy environments. Don't mention that most starter fish tanks are too small for the fish we sell. Just say, this one's perfect for beginners. Don't talk about enrichment. Don't talk about stress. Don't talk about what happens when a kid loses interest and the animal stops eating. The goal was to keep it light, positive, manageable. And it worked. We'd send families home with cages too small, food with too many fillers, and animals too fragile to survive the learning curve. We sold wheels that caused spinal deformities, bedding that triggered respiratory infections, fish tank filters that weren't strong enough to cycle ammonia out of the water. And when the pet died, they came back in, receipt in hand, sometimes holding the body in a small paper box like they were returning a pair of shoes. We'd apologize, process the refund, recommend another animal. Maybe a turtle this time? They're hardy. They get more attached than you'd think. But they don't. Not really. Not when they've been plucked from a shipment and sold within hours. Not when their water's never stable, or their heat lamp burns too hot, or their enclosure vibrates every time someone walks by. Not when the person holding them still thinks pet care is something you figure out as you go. The return policy said 14 days. What that really meant was, if they die fast enough, we'll pretend it didn't happen. I remember one man, I'll never forget him. He came in, red-eyed, clutching a shoebox wrapped in a towel. Inside was a tiny albino rat, barely 6 weeks old, curled into itself. Dead. He kept saying, "I don't know what I did wrong." She seemed fine. She was fine. I could tell he was grieving. Genuinely devastated. He asked if he could bury her behind the store. I had to tell him no. Company policy. No unsanctioned disposal. He left the box on the counter and walked out without taking the refund. I carried that box to the back, set it on the same shelf where we kept the bleach and trash bags, and stood there for a long time. I think that was the first moment I realized something I hadn't fully admitted to myself before. We didn't just fail the animals. We failed the people, too. We taught them to treat living things like products. We made it look easy so they'd spend more. We let them think a $29 cage could house a lifetime of happiness. And when things went wrong, when the animal got sick, or aggressive, or started pacing in circles until it collapsed, we made it seem like the fault lay with the customer. You must have done something wrong. Maybe your child was too rough. Did you follow the care sheet? God, the care sheets. 1-page printouts with cartoon icons and vague instructions. Feed daily. Clean weekly. Handle gently. No nuance. No mention of chronic issues. No list of red flags to watch for. Just enough to convince the buyer that they were prepared. But none of it was enough. We knew that. The managers knew it. Corporate definitely knew it. But here's the trick. If you sell failure as normal, no one questions it. Fish die. Hamsters bite. Birds pluck. Reptiles go cold. That's just how pets are, we'd say. And people believed us because they wanted to. Because if they didn't, they'd have to admit they weren't prepared. That the store misled them. That something small and breathing died in their care, and they didn't even know why. So they'd try again. Another hamster. Another tank. Another cage with brighter lights and more treats. And we'd smile. Nod. Ring them up. Because repeat customers pay more than first-time buyers. Especially the ones trying to fix what happened last time. And the animals? They just kept coming. More shipments. More smiles. More quiet, preventable deaths behind bedroom doors while a child sleeps nearby, thinking tomorrow will be better. But tomorrow, the cage will be empty. And the system will be ready, always ready, to sell them another. I didn't think it would happen like that. No confrontation. No outburst. Just a moment, small, almost forgettable, where something inside me broke without a sound. It was a Wednesday. The store was nearly empty. The overhead lights were flickering. One of the ballast units had been failing for weeks, but no one bothered to replace it. That's the kind of place it was. Constantly halfway to decay. I was assigned to a floor reset, rearranging enclosures to make room for a new seasonal display. Some corporate initiative called Small Pets, Big Hearts. A promotion designed to push hamster and guinea pig sales before school started. The display featured bright posters, cartoon graphics, and little plush toys clipped to the top of the cages. It was supposed to be inviting. Warm. A celebration of companionship. I was moving a bin of young guinea pigs, barely old enough to be weaned, when one of them collapsed in my hand. No sound. No struggle. Just a slow, limp fall, like something inside her had given up. I froze. I knew what came next. Check her vitals. Log the incident. Wrap her in a glove and carry her to the back room. Bag her. Label. Store. Dispose. But I didn't move. I just sat down on the floor, right there between the kibble aisle and the chew toy end cap, holding something warm that was already turning cold. And I thought, what the hell am I doing? Not just in that moment. In general. What was I doing with my life? This job wasn't just taking my time, it was taking parts of me I hadn't even realized were up for sale. My patience. My kindness. My ability to compartmentalize. My ability to look a child in the eyes and lie to them because corporate said that optimism keeps conversions high. I started noticing how much of myself had changed. Like how I stopped naming the animals. I used to, just in my head. Gave them little identities. Invented backstories. Told myself it mattered. But after a while, that stopped. They were just stock numbers. Shipment items. SKUs on the inventory sheet. Or I stopped pausing when I saw something wrong. An emaciated gecko. A fish gasping at the surface of a dirty tank. A rabbit with matted fur around its eyes. I used to raise alarms. Now, I just adjusted the signage, swapped their positions, made sure they weren't front-facing. Out of sight. Out of mind. And the worst part? I was good at it. Too good. I knew how to make it all look fine. I knew how to talk to customers in soft, reassuring tones. How to answer questions without saying anything real. How to avoid words like suffering, neglect, death. I became a specialist in gentle deception. But sitting there, with that tiny body in my lap, it hit me all at once. I had become the system. Not just a cog in the machine. I was the machine. A walking script. A mask with a pulse. And the longer I stayed, the harder it became to remember what I looked like without it. I left the guinea pig on a towel in the break room and stepped outside without clocking out. No phone. No purse. Just air. I stood in the back alley, breathing in the sour stench of the dumpsters, trying to stop my hands from shaking. I don't know how long I stood there. But at some point, a thought landed so quietly I almost didn't hear it. They'll just replace me. Not in a malicious way. Just, efficiently. Quietly. Like everything else in that place. If I burned out, someone else would step in. Another girl looking for part-time hours. Another college kid who loves animals. Another recent grad who thinks maybe this could be temporary. They wouldn't know what was waiting behind the glass. Not at first. Just like I didn't. I came back inside, washed my hands, and finished the floor reset. I did what I always did. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of grief. Because of how normal it had started to feel. That was the scariest part. Not the deaths. Not the lies. But the way all of it had become routine. I started dreaming in fluorescent light. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. thinking I'd forgotten to clean a cage or check a water bottle. I'd hear phantom squeaks. My apartment smelled like hay even when I scrubbed everything. I stopped listening to music because it reminded me of the in-store playlist. I stopped visiting friends because I couldn't explain why I was tired all the time. You don't realize how deep it gets until you're standing outside yourself, watching someone you used to be, someone with soft edges, and you can't remember what she cared about before she was trained to forget. A few days after that, a kid came in with a dead goldfish in a plastic bag. He couldn't have been older than 10. His face was blank. Like he didn't know how to feel. His mom was already at the register, asking for a replacement. I crouched down beside him, looked him in the eyes, and said something I'd never said to a customer before. "I'm sorry that happened." He nodded. No script. No smile. Just a small piece of truth between us. For once. And I knew, even if no one else noticed it, that was the first crack in the mask I wasn't going to patch. It took me almost a year to understand the real problem. Not the mills. Not the broken supply chain. Not even the deaths. Those were symptoms. The real problem was us. The people. The way we've been taught to think about animals and about ourselves. You see, the pet industry doesn't run on cruelty. It runs on something far more dangerous: comfort. The comfort of easy choices. Of clean answers. Of telling ourselves we're doing the right thing, even when we're not asking the right questions. I kept thinking about that little boy and his goldfish. The look on his face. The quiet confusion. He didn't know how to mourn it. No one had shown him how. He was learning, in that moment, how to treat life as replaceable. And we were the ones teaching him. Not through malice. Through convenience. And isn't that what the whole store was built on? Convenient care guides. Convenient products. Convenient truths. You could walk in with nothing, no knowledge, no preparation, no understanding of what a living thing needs to thrive, and walk out with a life in your hands and a bag full of starter supplies. And the scariest part? It felt normal. Like buying cereal. I think about that a lot now. The way we normalize things when they're packaged just right. How we convince ourselves that suffering doesn't count if we can't see it. That animals don't feel the way we do because they don't speak the way we do. But they do speak. You just have to be still enough to listen. The trembling of a rabbit who's been handled too roughly, too often. The pacing of a bird who's been locked in a glass box for too long. The wide, vacant stare of a guinea pig whose spine is already deteriorating from an undersized cage. These are not quirks. They are symptoms of fear, of deprivation, of a slow, quiet unraveling. And we label that behavior as shyness. Adjustment. Just give them time. Time doesn't fix conditions. Care does. But care requires effort, and the system knows most people won't make the effort if the sale comes first. So, it does the work for them. It curates a narrative. It tells you that small animals are easy. That fish are disposable. That reptiles don't need affection. That birds love to talk, but don't mind isolation. All of it is a lie. Even the term pet flattens them. Puts them in a category separate from us. Not beings. Not equals. Just a thing we own. A thing we buy. A thing we manage. And the store is built to reinforce that every second you're inside. We had cameras that tracked foot traffic to optimize product placement. We had scripts designed to turn hesitation into conversion. We had meetings about basket size and attach rate, not a single one about wellness outcomes. Not a single one about emotional care. The animals weren't even referred to as animals in our metrics. They were live inventory. And we played our part in all of it. Because that's what the system does best. It doesn't just train you to ignore suffering. It rewards you for it. Praises you for efficiency. Tells you you're doing a good job when you keep things moving, when you stop asking questions, when you smile through it all. Eventually, I stopped looking for a way to make it right. I started asking a harder question: what made me believe it was okay to begin with? And the answer was painful. I believed it because I wanted to, because believing the lie was easier than sitting with the guilt. Because the truth, that we're complicit in harm, even when we mean well, is too much for most people to carry. But I carry it now. And here's what I've learned from that weight. We are not born indifferent. We are taught to look away. We are taught to silence our discomfort, to value ease over ethics, to choose what feels good instead of what is good. And once you see that, once you feel it in your bones, you can't unsee it. Not in the store. Not in the world. Because the truth is, this isn't just about animals. It never was. It's about how we treat anything we think we own. How we treat anything we think is beneath us. How we justify harm when it's small, distant, or silent. We do it with animals. We do it with people. We do it with the planet. And we dress it up in good intentions, smiling faces, and corporate jargon until it stops feeling like harm at all. But it is harm. It always was. Conclusions and reflections. Looking back now, I can see exactly when I stopped being a worker and became a witness. It wasn't a single moment. It was a series of tiny fractures, hairline cracks that formed every time I had to choose between doing what felt right and doing what I was told. Every time I looked the other way. Every time I used the script instead of the truth. I used to think the job changed me. But really, it revealed me. It showed me how much I was willing to excuse for the sake of stability. For a paycheck. For peace of mind. And that's the part that hurts the most. Not that the system is broken, but that I helped keep it running. Even when I knew better. I don't work there anymore. I'll tell you how I left in the final part. But I still carry the memories. The weight. The guilt. And maybe I always will. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Because guilt, if you let it, can become something else. Not shame. Not punishment. Responsibility. And we need more of that in this world. Especially when the ones suffering can't speak for themselves. I don't work there anymore. I didn't quit with a speech or a dramatic exit. I just didn't show up one day. I stared at the schedule on my fridge, saw my name for the Saturday morning shift, and I felt this quiet, terrifying certainty rise in my chest. I can't go back in there. Not one more time. So I didn't. I didn't call. I didn't explain. I left my apron in the trunk of my car, folded like something sacred I'd stopped believing in. And for a long time, I said nothing. Because who do you even tell this to? Who wants to hear that the place they bought their kid's first pet was built on pain? Who wants to believe that the sweet girl behind the register, the one who helped you pick out bedding and food and a colorful little cage, was dying a little inside as she smiled and said, "You're all set. Good luck." No one wants to hear that. But I'm saying it now. Because someone has to. And maybe that someone had to be me. Because I was there. I saw what they hope you'll never ask about. I touched it. I logged it. I buried it in plastic bags and freezer drawers. And I carried it home with me. Every single day. People always ask me now, so what should we do? Just never buy pets again. And honestly, I don't have a perfect answer. I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty for loving animals. Love isn't the problem. It's the way we love. We love through ownership. Through convenience. Through the belief that a life can be bought, accessorized, contained. And when that love starts with a barcode, it always ends the same way. Too soon. Too small. Too quiet. So here's what I want to ask you now. Have you ever wondered where your pet came from? Have you ever asked what conditions they were born into, or how many didn't survive the shipment? Have you ever thought about what happens to the ones that don't sell? The ones that get too old, too sick, too aggressive, too inconvenient. I know these are uncomfortable questions. I know it's easier not to ask. I did that too. For a long time. But maybe discomfort is where we should start. Because the only reason the system keeps working is because no one talks about it. No one questions it. No one wants to pull back the curtain and see the truth hiding behind the cheerful music and the impulse buy end caps. But maybe it's time. Maybe that's why I'm telling you this. Because if just one person hears this and starts to see things differently, maybe that's enough. Maybe they'll walk into a pet store and ask a real question. Maybe they'll stop seeing that bunny in the glass box as a product and start seeing it as a being. Maybe they'll pause before buying a starter kit and realize there's no such thing as a starter life. And maybe, just maybe, they'll say something out loud to someone else. Because silence is what keeps the system running. But stories? Stories break it open. So if you've made it this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever worked in a pet store? Or any place where you were told to smile through something that didn't feel right? Have you ever brought home an animal, only to find out too late you weren't given the full truth? Have you seen corners cut in the name of profit? Have you had to look away to keep your job? I know I'm not the only one. So if you've got a story, tell it. Leave a comment. Start a conversation. Even if it's small. Even if it's painful. Especially if it's painful. Because that's how things start to change. Not all at once. Not with petitions or protests. But with people who refuse to stay quiet just because the system expects them to. And if this story meant something to you, if it made you think twice, or made you feel less alone, share it. With a friend. With a coworker. With someone who's never thought about where those little glass box lives really come from. Because I believed in the lie once too. And someone had to show me the truth. Now I'm showing it to you. Whatever you do with it next. That's up to you. Thank you for listening. Really, it matters more than you know.